professional at this. But my plan would be to try to give you a little bit of view of what's going on at General Assembly, and then a little bit more specific about your particular bills of interest. You know, the General Assembly session this year was it was set up by first redistricting, and Republicans had control of redistricting in the House and really did a good job with it. And today with computers, it's amazing how you can get down and redistricting down right down to the street and who votes which way, and you can be pretty certain about what happens as an outcome. And Republicans had control of the House and therefore picked up 8 seats. Democrats didn't do quite as good a job in the Senate, and there may be a number of reasons for that, but the Democrats had 22-18 split when they went through the redistricting process, and ended up losing 2 seats, one in Southside Virginia and one in the Fredericksburg area, and with that made a 20-20 split in the Senate, but 120 was more valuable than the other 20 in that the Lieutenant Governor can break ties except for the budget. You cannot vote on the budget because you have to be a senator to vote on the budget, and a majority of the senators elected have to pass a budget. And the same thing with judgeships. So there are 2 places which the senators could not rely upon a tie break from the Lieutenant Governor. I believe the Lieutenant Governor this time, I forgot an exact number, but I think it was 17 ties or something, I think, that he broke on votes on bills during the session. But in any event, that created an interesting situation. Now, you've read about all this, so I won't go into great detail about it, but just basically you've been hearing, well, the Democrats are crying in the Senate, and some of the things I say may offend Frank, and he'll take it out on me later today, but some of what you've been hearing is Democrats saying, well, we were fair when we had this situation before, and we had power sharing. And as I think most of you know, fairness is an eye of the beholder, because actually what happened was they had 1 and possibly 2 Democratic senators when there was a tie before who said, we will not vote to elect only Democratic leadership, and we will only support power sharing. One of them was a famous renegade as a Democrat who became an independent and a Republican, Virgil Goode, but also former State Senator Charlie Waddell apparently was also suggesting he'd be in that same camp. So that's what happened before. So the power sharing before was not exactly what it's called voluntary power sharing. It was forced within the Democratic caucus. Now let's get a little bit to what happened in the House with the overwhelming majority, 68 sitting in the Republican caucus out of 100 in the House. You can see why what Frank was talking about, no taxes, no tax pledge that many of the House members have taken that comes out of a national movement. The House is not going to vote for a new tax. That's just pretty clear that anything that you call a new tax. Now, fee, they love fees. There are a lot of other ways they will get your money, but anything that can be labeled a tax, then you're not going to see that get out of the House. This session, a lot of what you saw in the press was about social issues and about gun control. It was a very small percentage of the bills, as the House wanted to point out, that it was only about 2.5% of the bills maybe address social issues. But it was much more important than that, really. I mean, overall, I think they realized they made a big mistake letting those bills, all those bills, get out of the House. It was a situation which pent-up demand of years of having everything defeated in a Senate committee that was controlled by Democrats. There was Senate Committee, Education and Health was set up to stop social legislation that came out of the House, but with the change in the Senate, and that committee went from 8-7 Democrats and 1 Republican who would vote with the Democrats quite often to stop social legislation, what they considered to be extreme social legislation. That flipped to an 8-7 control by Republicans, and a chairman who was very much in support of the social legislation. So a number of bills got out of the House. The governor, quite frankly, I think would have been much happier if there had been a Democrat-controlled Senate to keep that legislation from coming to his desk. And I'm sure Dr. Holsworth will get into more detail about the impact of that. I think what you'll find as a result of the ultrasound bill, which was narrowed down to jelly on the belly, they call it bill as opposed to vaginal ultrasound. I think everybody, even the patron of the bill, whom I talked with about it, would have preferred to have had much less invasive legislation on it, but as it turned out, her bill kind of got taken control by some men in the House, and she was not particularly happy with what ended up coming out of the House. But bottom line is, the governor needed to have this thing toned down some, and it was. But the social legislation got the headlines, and you know what we do down there, that's sort of noise. We don't really get involved in it. We don't want to be involved in it. We just continue to work with the bills that are of interest to you and our clients. But it really was an important aspect of what took place, and a lot of behind-the-scenes jockeying, and you kind of had to know what was going on with that, because there are things that come out of that create people getting some favors by voting certain ways on it that you need to know about, because it may come into effect on something that you want. This session, there were over 2,800 bills and resolutions introduced. That's about standard. Somewhere close to 3,000 is what we've been experiencing for quite a few years now, even after they put in some limits on the introduction, some efforts to try to limit the number of bills introduced. There were actually 2,876 bills and resolutions. Out of that, there were 1,616 that passed. And so far, the governor has approved about 400 of those, signed about 400. As you see, 1,600 bills and resolutions is kind of a high number, a high percentage over what we've experienced in the past that actually passed. The whole anger over the reorganization of the Senate resulted in the deadlock that we have now on the budget. You saw that coming from the early days of the session. And quite frankly, one of the things, and I see the senators left, so I can get a little bit more free when I say about this part of it, they treated Senator Colgan rather shabbily. It was really one of the things that was probably a mistake on the Republican side. And they had every right to take control of the committees and chairmanships and all, and having the lieutenant governor break the tie to take control. That's all legal and constitutional, we believe. But you have Senator Colgan, who has been absolutely nonpartisan throughout his career. Actually used to have a fundraiser with a Republican senator, Democrats and Republicans who got along just great. Senator Chichester, Senator Colgan, both having been chairman of the Finance Committee when each of their parties were in majority. A gentleman, the longest serving state senator in the history of Virginia. Not only did he lose being President Pro Tem, which they could have left as ceremonial mainly, lost being chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, which had the right to lose that, take that from him, but also they moved him off of the 6th floor. And the 6th floor is a leadership floor. And in the past, there's been some accommodations been made when changes took place, but they moved him back down to the 3rd floor with all the regular senators, and a little corner office where there was actually a space on the 6th floor he could have been. But for that one thing, I believe we would not have had a budget deadlock that we had. That one thing of moving him, because he is a senator who would have voted with the Republicans to get a budget out, because as a former chairman of the Finance Committee, there's almost a bond. It's sacred. You don't stop the budget